Clutching my swollen stomach, I fought a new wave of pain, trying to focus on breathing. The back seat of our car reminded me of a cramped prison where I was locked up, along with agonizing contractions, fears, and a growing sense of helplessness. Nathan, my husband, was driving, his face a mixture of anxiety and tension. Every gesture he made, every quick glance in the rearview mirror, indicated that he understood the seriousness of what was happening, but it was as if he was struggling with something inside. His eyes met mine in the mirror, and I longed to find comfort in them, the confidence that would help me withstand the pain. But this brief moment of calm was interrupted by the sharp ringing of the phone. The sound broke the silence of the cabin, and I saw Nathan's expression change from alarm to confusion, and then to something I couldn't immediately understand. "This is Vanessa," he said, his voice taut as a string. My heart skipped a beat. The mention of his sister always brought with it a shadow of tension, like an invisible third person present in our marriage. I saw him take the call and tried to listen, but Vanessa's words were just a muffled echo in my ears. "But Laura is giving birth, Vanessa." Nathan's voice grew louder, more insistent. I strained to make out more, but the conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Nathan hung up the phone and swerved to the curb, slamming on the brakes. "I need to help Vanessa. She got stuck at the station, her car broke down." "She's panicking," he said, getting out of the car. The pain from the contractions pierced me even more sharply. Nathan's words seemed wild and unreal to me. I couldn't believe my ears. "But what about the hospital?" My voice was barely audible, but there was both disbelief and despair in it. "Nathan, I'm about to give birth." "I know," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "But you can call an ambulance. They will arrive faster. Vanessa is alone and needs help." Everything inside me screamed. "Nathan, please, I need you." I begged, feeling the pain of contractions mixed with the pain of misunderstanding. He just shook his head and looked away again. "I'm sorry, Laura. I have to do this. Just call 911. They will arrange everything." My hands were shaking as I took out my phone and dialed the emergency number. His face remained tense but unyielding as he helped me out of the car. The icy night air blew over me, but the cold in my heart was stronger. Nathan didn't look at me as he got back into the car, and I just had time to see his taillights disappear into the darkness. I was alone. An ambulance siren sounded in the distance, but the sound did not bring relief. Tears were streaming down my face, mixing with the pain tearing at me from the inside. I hardly heard the voices of the paramedics as they put me on a stretcher. Questions were buzzing in my head. How could he leave me at this moment? How could he prefer his sister to our child? Soon the hospital appeared outside the ambulance windows. But even then, the pain of betrayal continued to torment me. Lying in a hospital bed, I tried to put myself back together. My son was born at the first rays of dawn. His tiny body warmed my trembling hands, and I should have felt only joy. But Nathan's betrayal overshadowed that moment like a thundercloud covering the sky. Every thought brought me back to the past, to moments that now had a different connotation. Conversations that I ignored. Signs that seemed insignificant. Vanessa has always been a difficult part of our marriage, but today she has become a crack in it. Vanessa has always been the center of attention in their family. I clearly remember our wedding day. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but Vanessa managed to turn it into a performance about herself. She arrived in a bright white dress that attracted everyone's attention. Every detail of her image, from the dazzling sparkling jewelry to the smug smile, screamed about her desire to be in the center of events. "This is not the white color that is usually reserved for brides," I whispered to Nathan, trying to hide my irritation. He just shrugged, muttering casually, "This is Vanessa. Don't take it personally." But it was hard for me not to accept it. Her behavior was only a foreshadowing of the many years that followed, when every opportunity to overshadow me or undermine my authority was used by her without hesitation. Nathan either didn't seem to notice this, or indifferently justified her actions. I remembered countless family dinners where Vanessa dominated the conversations. It seemed that all the topics came back to her, her problems, her achievements, her dramas. Nathan's parents listened to her in silence, never trying to stop her monologue. Were they intimidated by her domineering personality or just didn't want to interfere? This question has been bothering me for a long time. One day, trying to dilute her monopolization of dinner, I ventured to interject. Maybe Laura has something she'd like to share too. Vanessa gave me a withering look. Oh, please. What could be more interesting than my disastrous day? She replied sarcastically. Nathan smiled, dismissing my attempt to change the conversation. Let her speak, Laura. You know how much she loves drama. At first, I thought it was taking care of my sister. But over the years it became clear, it was more than just brotherly affection. It was a constant preference for her interests over mine. Every time I looked at our son, I realized how much I had to go through to keep the peace in the family. Nathan's action that night was not an accident, but the culmination of all those years when I remained in the background. His choice in favor of Vanessa was the final blow, confirmation that my place in his life was lower than I thought. A knock on the door of the hospital room pulled me out of the stream of bitter thoughts. My parents were standing on the threshold, their faces radiating warmth and love. They immediately went to the bed, carefully picking up their grandson. This is just the beginning, Laura, my father said, putting his hand on mine. You're stronger than you think. Their presence was a breath of air for me. When they left, promising to return with everything they needed, I made a decision. I'm not going to let Nathan and Vanessa dictate my life anymore. It's time to set boundaries and protect yourself. My son needed a mother who could stand up for him, and I was determined to become just that. A few months before my son was born, I led an excursion to the local science center, museum, where I once studied in the 2nd grade. It was a responsible job, which I always took very seriously. As I led the excited children to the planetarium, my phone, hidden in my bag, vibrated incessantly. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I turned off the sound so as not to be distracted, but this feeling that the call was important did not leave me. When the show was over and the kids started exploring the exhibits with the museum staff, I finally checked my phone. The unknown number left several missed calls, eventually being replaced by Nathan's number. My heart sank. Something has happened. Moving away from the noisy group of children, I hurriedly called back. Her husband's agitated, almost angry voice came on the line. Laura, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you. I'm on a field trip, Nathan. What happened? There was growing concern in my voice. This is Vanessa, he blurted out, as if those 2 words were supposed to explain everything. An unexpected concert of her favorite singer is taking place in the park. They sell a limited edition of autographed photographs. You should buy her one. I froze at his words, feeling indignation and bewilderment rise in me like a wave. Nathan, I'm working. I can't just leave, I replied, trying to stay calm even though my fingers were clutching the phone convulsively. You don't understand, Laura. She's very upset. You're here, just come in and do it, he insisted, as if my job didn't matter at all. I was momentarily speechless at the audacity of his request. There was a group of 20 children in front of me, for whom I was responsible, and Nathan expected me to leave them for some capricious whim of his sister. Nathan, no. I have a duty to these children. I can't and I'm not going to leave, I replied firmly, trying not to show my resentment. There was an oppressive silence in the receiver. Then his voice cut through her with the force of a blow. You're being selfish, Laura. It means a lot to Vanessa. His words echoed in my head, hitting every chord of my inner dignity. I gritted my teeth, keeping myself from answering, which would only add fuel to the fire. No, Nathan. My students come first, I replied, and heard him abruptly hang up the phone. The rest of the tour was a blur. Physically, I was with the children, watching for their safety and smiling, but mentally I was still digesting what had happened. How could my husband so easily dismiss what was important to me? This is not just a small dispute. It was about principles. When I returned home, the silence in the house seemed deafening to me. Nathan is gone. There was a note on the kitchen table, written in his typically laconic style. I'm with my parents. I need to think about it. That night, lying alone in our bed, I stared at the ceiling, trying to put my thoughts in order. Nathan's demand was not only unreasonable, but also humiliating. It was a clear signal that his priorities lay apart from our relationship. Instead of supporting me, he continued to indulge Vanessa's whims. This thought was a turning point for me. I realized that I could no longer live in the shadow of her whims and his indifference. I had to change something, not only for myself, but also for my son. But I didn't know yet that my resolve would soon be tested in the most unexpected circumstances. A few weeks later, having gathered my courage, I decided to go to Nathan's parents to discuss what had happened. However, when I crossed the threshold of their house, I immediately felt the tension in the air. Nathan, Vanessa, and his parents were sitting in the living room. Their expressions ranged from guilty to expectant. Nathan was the first to break the silence. Laura, you owe Vanessa an apology. I froze, as if thunder had hit me right in the chest. Apologize? My voice broke, I could barely speak. Vanessa, sitting on the edge of the sofa, crossed her arms and leaned forward, her voice sounding self-pitying. Yes, Laura. Your selfishness ruined my evening. I missed the opportunity to get an autograph. Do you have any idea how important this was to me? I stared at her in disbelief. Vanessa, I was working. I had responsibilities, I said, trying to keep my voice even though everything was boiling inside. Vanessa sniffed dramatically, turning to Nathan and their parents for support. You see, she doesn't care. She almost screamed. She ruined my day. Nathan's mother, who had been watching silently all this time, finally intervened in a low but firm voice. Laura, would you just apologize to keep the peace? A surge of disappointment washed over me. It wasn't a matter of keeping the peace. It was a matter of constantly catering to Vanessa's unreasonable desires. Before I could answer, Vanessa shoved her phone at me, where there was an ad from a flea market on the screen. Okay, then buy this for me, she said, showing an image of an autographed photo. This is the same photo, but it costs $300. I was stunned. $300 for a photo, just because I refused to quit my job for her whims? Nathan, noticing my confusion, gently nudged me. Just do it, Laura. This will fix everything, he said with a note of urgency. Something inside me broke. The years spent in the shadows, the years when my feelings and career were ignored, came crashing down on me in an instant. No, Nathan. I won't do that, I replied, my voice steadied despite the storm of emotions inside. Vanessa gasped. But you owe me. Her voice rang with indignation. I looked at her directly. I don't owe you anything, Vanessa. I've been putting up with this for too long, I said, then turned to Nathan. And you? You were supposed to be my partner. But instead, you choose Vanessa all the time. What does that leave for me? What does this leave us with? Nathan looked confused. His eyes darted around, trying to find words that could justify him. But she's my sister, he muttered, as if that explained everything. That's not an excuse. I interrupted. Her antics, your family. I won't be a part of this drama anymore. Before he could answer, I turned around and left, leaving them in stunned silence. The cool evening air burned my flushed cheeks, but it was saving. It was my first step towards freedom, my way of saying that I no longer intend to be a pawn in their game. That night, lying in bed alone, I felt an unusual sense of power. I realized that my marriage to Nathan was just a faint shadow of what it should have been. It is time to regain your life and dignity. Even if it meant going against Nathan and his family. Even if the way forward turns out to be difficult. A few weeks later, my resolve was confronted with unexpected news. On a typical morning, when the nausea was worse than usual, I decided to take a pregnancy test. The result was positive. Sitting on the bathroom floor, holding the test in my hands, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: joy, fear, and heavy responsibility. This time, I knew I had to protect my child from the toxic environment that Nathan and his family had created. When I finally broke the news to Nathan, his reaction was painfully sluggish. He just shrugged, answering absently. "That's great, I guess." Then he plunged back into the phone screen. I couldn't help but notice Vanessa's name flashing by. It was like it was following me. With each passing day, Nathan's indifference became more obvious. He was less and less at home, more and more often being either at his parents' house or running errands for Vanessa. One evening I was left alone, surrounded by books about pregnancy, ultrasound scans, and growing doubts. The silence that followed became almost palpable when Nathan entered the living room. His face was tense, his eyes avoiding my gaze. "We need to talk," he began, sitting down across from me. I felt something heavy squeezing inside. "Is it because of the baby?" I asked carefully, trying to prepare for his words. He sighed, looking away. "Vanessa thinks we should move in with my parents. It would be better for everyone, extra help, you know." I froze, staring at him in disbelief. "With your parents?" "Nathan, this is our family. We have to make decisions together, not based on what Vanessa wants." His shoulders tensed, and his voice took on a note of irritation. "You just don't understand, Laura. Vanessa knows better. She's been through a lot, and she just wants to help." "Can I help you?" I asked, feeling a growing wave of disappointment. "No, Nathan. Our child needs a stable, healthy environment, not another drama that Vanessa brings." He jumped up, waving his arms. "You're being unreasonable, Laura. She's just trying to be there for you." I shook my head, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. "No, Nathan. You don't see the obvious. You're so engrossed in her world that you can't notice what's going on in your own family." His face tightened, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he silently turned around and left the room. I heard the front door slam, and that night spent alone became for me a symbol of the final break between us. The gap between Nathan and me has become insurmountable. In the following weeks, I started acting. I collected documents, studied how to cope better alone. I had to be strong, not only for myself, but also for our children. Vanessa's shadow could no longer affect my life. The day my water broke started as usual. But soon the contractions took hold of me, turning every move into a struggle. Nathan was there, his voice calm and confident. It seemed like he was really trying, that he was ready to be with me when it was most important. We were halfway to the hospital when his phone rang. I tensed up when I heard a familiar ringtone. "Don't answer," I begged through clenched teeth. Another contraction pierced me, making me twist in pain. Nathan hesitated, but picked up the phone anyway. "Hi, Vanessa, what's wrong?" Like a cold shower, his words hit me. I couldn't believe it. At that moment, when I was about to give birth to our child, Vanessa was once again the center of his attention. "She can't go to her favorite band's concert because of train problems," he said, then froze, listening. "Laura, I have to help her." The world around me seemed to slow down. "Nathan, I'm giving birth." I screamed, fear and disbelief vibrating in my voice. "I know," he replied, as if that wasn't a good enough argument. "But it's important for Vanessa. You can call an ambulance, right?" His voice sounded insistent, as if he was offering a reasonable solution. I was stunned when he slowed down, opened my door and helped me out. "Call 911, he said, holding my hospital bag in his hand. And then, without waiting for an answer, he drove off, leaving me alone on the side of the road. The cold air burned his face, the pain of contractions increased, but the feeling of abandonment burned the most. I felt a mixture of rage, alienation, and utter disbelief. How could he do this to me and our child? Even at this most critical moment, Nathan managed to put Vanessa above our family. Through a veil of pain and shock, I found the strength to call an ambulance and, despite everything, got to the hospital. The nurses immediately surrounded me, their voices muffled, as if through water. I only mechanically followed their instructions, internally struggling not only with labor pains, but also with the bitter realization of my husband's betrayal. A few hours later, exhausted but overwhelmed with emotion, I held my newborn son in my arms. His tiny face radiated innocence and calmness, at odds with the drama surrounding his birth. Looking at him, I felt a fierce protective instinct. At that moment, I swore to myself that no one, not Nathan, not Vanessa, would ever be able to jeopardize his future again. Nathan's betrayal was the last straw. It was inexcusable and unacceptable. A clear sign that he will always choose Vanessa over our family. As I lay in my hospital bed listening to my son's quiet breathing, a plan began to form in my head. Nathan and Vanessa cannot escape responsibility for their actions. I swore I'd take care of it. When night fell and my son was sleeping peacefully next to me, I already knew, I have to fight for myself and my child. Vanessa and Nathan have gone too far, and now it's time for them to understand the seriousness of their actions. In the weeks following the birth of my son, my resolve only strengthened. Their callous disregard for our family could no longer go unpunished. I started with legal advice. At the first meeting with the lawyer, I outlined everything: Nathan's financial irresponsibility, his emotional neglect, and, finally, his refusal to support me at a time when it was vital. The lawyer listened attentively, his face becoming more serious with every word I said. "This is more than just a marital rift," he finally said. "This is a refusal to support a spouse in a vulnerable state. We can go to court." I nodded, feeling a surge of strength. Nathan and Vanessa should have understood the severity of their actions. Meanwhile, Nathan's behavior became more and more disgusting. He came to the hospital pretending to be worried, but I immediately realized that it was just a performance, most likely for his parents or Vanessa herself. "Laura, please, let's talk," he pleaded, his eyes darting nervously around. I hugged my son closer to me, as if protecting him from Nathan's presence. "We have nothing to talk about, Nathan," I said coldly. "You've made your choice." "But Vanessa needed me," he began, trying to justify himself. "You don't understand the pressure she's under." "The only pressure was on me and our son when you left us," I snapped. "I'm filing for divorce. You and Vanessa will have to answer for everything you've done." Nathan's face paled. "You can't do this, Laura. Think about our family." I laughed bitterly. "Family? You stopped thinking about our family long before that." After this meeting, I ordered that Nathan and his relatives could not visit me or my son in the hospital. My parents supported me, their disappointment in Nate was palpable. The trial was a grueling but necessary step. I presented all the evidence to the court: neglect, denial of responsibility, Nathan's emotional manipulation. The judge treated my case with understanding, especially considering the circumstances of his betrayal. The judge granted me a favorable divorce agreement, including full custody of the children and substantial alimony. When the verdict was handed down, I glanced at Nathan. There was a mixture of shock and realization on his face. The reality of his actions seemed to finally begin to sink in. Vanessa was standing next to him. Her face contorted into an indignant grimace, and she couldn't help herself. "It's not fair. You are destroying our family," she shouted with theatrical vehemence. I stopped, turned to her and said calmly but firmly, "This is the result of your actions, Vanessa. You and Nathan can only blame yourself." As I left the courtroom, I felt a heavy weight fall off my shoulders. I stood up for myself and my children, getting justice. It was a difficult victory, but a necessary step towards restoring life. Leaving behind Nathan's betrayal and Vanessa's endless intrigues, I decided to start all over again. After the divorce was finalized, I focused on recovery. A new chapter has begun with my children. Having accepted my role as a single mother, I returned to teaching, where I found solace and inspiration. The joy of my students, the support of my colleagues, and the daily small achievements have become my new sources of strength. My parents, taking over some of the care of the children, provided me with great help. Their love and unshakable faith in me helped me get through difficulties. But life was not without challenges. Nathan, unable to accept the reality of our divorce, tried to get in touch. His messages ranged from pleas for forgiveness to angry accusations of family destruction. Every time I read them, I realized how much he had become a stranger to me, a man absorbed in his own selfishness and manipulation. I made a firm decision to avoid contact, focusing on creating a stable and loving home for my children. They were still too young to understand the complexity of what was happening, but their adaptation to a new life inspired me. Their steadfastness and the joy with which they perceived every day filled me with pride. One day, while picking up my son from kindergarten, I noticed the worried expression on his teacher's face. She took me aside and whispered, "Laura, there's a man outside. He's asking about you. He says he's your husband." My heart skipped a beat. Nathan. Even after all, he couldn't let go. I asked the teacher not to let him in and to call the police if he refused to leave. On the way home, my son was chatting cheerfully in the back seat, and I realized that I was ready to do anything to protect them from the toxic influence of Nathan. Time passed. The weeks turned into months, and the shadow of Nathan and Vanessa gradually disappeared from our lives. I found strength in my independence and in the world that we began to rebuild. However, despite the satisfaction that Nathan and Vanessa faced the consequences of their actions, I felt that revenge was not as sweet as I had imagined. She drained my emotions, leaving me bitter and tired. I realized that I needed to let go of the past in order to focus on the present and the future. My children deserved a mother who was completely immersed in their lives, not obsessed with the past. Our future was filled with opportunities and new beginnings. When I put my son to bed that night, his tiny arms wrapped around my neck, and I felt deeply confident in the correctness of my decision. Our journey was difficult, but it led us to a place of love, stability, and hope. It was worth more than any revenge.